Our sensory system helps us keep in touch with our external environment. The special senses are sight, hearing, equilibrium, taste, and smell. Touch is considered a general sense. We'll start by looking at the eye. The eye is our sense of sight, our vision. The eye has three tunics or layers: the sclera, the choroid coat, and the retina. Then there are some internal structures: the lens, the anterior chamber, and the posterior chamber. The sclera is the outermost layer of the eyeball. It's composed of thick white connective tissue. In the very front, it's transparent. This is the cornea. Light has to enter the eye, and this is the area where light enters the eye. There are no blood vessels in this part of the cornea, and this part can easily be transplanted. The middle layer is the choroid. This layer is rich in blood vessels. It does have a dark pigment to it that prevents light from scattering once it gets into the eye. The iris is the colored part of the eye, and this is a specialization of the choroid. It's a muscle that controls the amount of light that enters the eye. The opening in the center is known as the pupil. The pupil can dilate to let more light in or constrict to reduce the amount of light that enters the eyeball. The innermost layer is the retina. The retina contains the photoreceptors, the rods and the cones. The dendrites of the neurons that are going to form the optic nerve are associated with the photoreceptors. When the photoreceptors are activated by light, this causes the electrical impulse to start on the dendrites. This will travel on the neurons to the optic nerve. The rods are useful in dim light. They pick up gray tones. The cones pick up color in bright light. Here we see a picture of the eyeball. The outer coat is the sclera, the middle coat is the choroid, and the innermost coat is the retina. The sclera is tough and fibrous, and it is clear here in the front to make up the cornea. The choroid coat has the blood vessels in it, and the blood vessels are essential in feeding the retina. Also, there is a specialization here at the iris, and the hole is the pupil. Light can come through the clear cornea and then through the pupil to get to the photoreceptors in the retina. The blood supply to the retina is strictly that of the choroid blood supply. If the retina detaches from the choroid coat, those neurons will die. All of the neurons that make up the retina come together to make up the optic nerve. The internal structures of the eyeball include the lens. The lens focuses light onto the retina. This is a biconvex disc that's held in place by some specialized muscles that are from the choroid layer. The anterior chamber is that part of the eyeball that's in front of the lens. It is filled with aqueous humor, which is a watery fluid that's secreted by blood vessels from the choroid coat. This maintains pressure and provides nutrients for the cornea and the lens. The retina has to constantly be pushed back against the choroid coat, and this aqueous humor is part of what does that. The posterior chamber is the chamber that's behind the lens. It is filled with vitreous humor. This is a gel-like substance that helps keep the retina attached to the choroid. Unlike the aqueous humor, which is constantly made and reabsorbed, the vitreous humor is formed at birth and does not change. So here we see the eyeball again. Here is the lens. Here's the specialized muscles of the choroid coat and the ligaments that hold the lens in place. The anterior chamber has the aqueous humor in it. Blood vessels here form this and reabsorb it, so this is constantly changing so it can nourish the lens and the cornea. And then back behind the lens we have the vitreous humor, and the vitreous humor completely fills the posterior chamber and helps keep the retina pushed back against the choroid coat so it can get its nutrition. When doctors look through an ophthalmoscope, which is the instrument they use to look through your eye, they're looking through the pupil to examine the retina. And what they see, if it's a normal eye, is this injected area. They're seeing the blood vessels in the choroid. They're seeing a darkened area, which is a collection of photoreceptors, and this light area, which is where the optic nerve leaves the eye. This would be a fairly normal-looking retina. Night blindness is the result of a vitamin A deficiency. Vitamin A is necessary for the rods to refresh themselves after they have been exposed to light. If there's an insufficient vitamin A constituency in the diet, the rods can't replace themselves. Color blindness is a genetic condition. With color blindness, people lack some of the cones. Red and green cones are the most common ones that are missing in color blindness, but other cone colors can be missing as well. A cataract happens when the lens hardens and becomes cloudy or opaque. Light then can't get through the lens and the vision appears cloudy. Glaucoma occurs when the aqueous humor doesn't drain properly. This puts extra pressure on the retina and the optic nerve. There are no pressure or pain receptors in the eye, so this goes undetected. Now, because the retina is primarily nervous tissue, if you put pressure on it, you're going to reduce the blood supply to it. This means those nerves will die. Glaucoma can result in blindness if it goes untreated. Vision occurs because light is focused on the photoreceptors in the retina of the eye. As light passes through media, it gets bent. This is called refraction, and this is the function of the lens, to bend the light and focus it on the retina. The image that's formed on the retina is reversed and smaller than the one that you're actually seeing. The neurons from the retina will then carry the impulse to the optic nerve. The optic nerve will enter the brain and go into what are called the optic tracts, and eventually will end up in the occipital lobe of the brain. It is in the occipital lobe of the cerebrum that these impulses are translated into sight. Some people have to wear glasses, and they have to wear glasses if their lens does not properly bend light. Now, this is what we call an emmetropic eye, a normal eye. No visual assistance is required. The eyeball is just the right length. The lens is set up to focus light in one spot on the retina. In a myopic eye or a nearsighted eye, the eyeball is a little too long. The light focuses in front of the retina. Corrective lenses help make the light focus further back. Now, these are going to be concave lenses, so these are relatively thin lenses. In a hyperoptic eye or a farsighted eye, the eyeball is too short. The lens focuses the eye behind the retina, so they see close-up things as really fuzzy. They need convex lenses. Now, these are very thick lenses, so these are the people that are wearing very heavy, thick glasses. But this will help focus the light appropriately on the retina. The ear is responsible for hearing and balance, and the ear can be divided into three major parts. The outer ear has the skin flap that's known as the pinna or the auricle. This helps collect sound and direct sound down the external auditory canal. This is a canal that goes through the temporal bone. It's lined with skin, and in the skin we have ceruminous glands. These secrete earwax. Earwax helps trap dust and dirt and insects and anything that might try to get deeper into your ear. Also, it can act sort of like acoustical tiling. It can help absorb really loud sound waves. At the end of the external auditory canal is the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. So this is at the very end of that canal. The second portion of the ear is the middle ear. Now, this is a small air-filled cavity in the temporal bone. It begins at the eardrum. There is a tube, the pharyngotympanic tube or the eustachian tube, that opens to the throat. This is used to help equalize pressure on the eardrum. If you go up in an airplane or in an elevator, your ears may pop. That's because of the pressure equalizing in the middle ear and the outer ear. The pharyngotympanic tube also acts as an avenue for bacteria from the throat to get up into the middle ear. In small children, this leads to multiple ear infections at times. In the middle ear are the three smallest bones of the body. These are called the ear ossicles, and they're going to transmit vibrations to the inner ear. The bones are named the malleus or the hammer, the incus or the anvil, and the stapes or the stirrup. So as we look at the ear, the external ear has the pinna. This collects sound waves and directs them down the external auditory canal to the eardrum. Now, as sound waves hit the eardrum, it will begin to vibrate. That vibration will be transmitted to the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Since this is an air-filled chamber, these bones vibrate freely. Here is the eustachian tube. This goes down to the throat. It does help equalize pressure on the eardrum, but it can also act as an avenue for bacteria to get into the middle ear. Bacteria in the middle ear will cause fluid in the middle ear, and this may affect hearing because now these bones won't be in air, but they'll be in fluid, so they won't vibrate as freely. This vibration is going to be transmitted to the structures of the inner ear. As we look at the inner ear, this is a bony labyrinth that's carved out of the temporal bone with three major chambers. We have the cochlea, this little coiled up snail looking thing. This is where the receptors for hearing are located. Then we have the vestibule. This is where some of our balance receptors are located. And then we have the semicircular canals. And this is the other balance organ of the body. All of these are filled with fluid and with special receptor cells that are called hair cells. This is the vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8, that comes in with branches to the vestibule and to the cochlea. Hearing is a function of the organ of Corti, which is located in the cochlea. This contains the hearing receptors. Now, the hearing receptors are these specialized hair cells that stick up here, and there is this special membrane over them. Fluid fills this part of the tube. As we send the vibrations into the cochlea, this fluid is disturbed. As the fluid is disturbed, these hair cells go up and down, and they brush against this tectorial membrane. This causes a stimulus to be sent along the neurons. So these receptor cells send impulses. These neurons become part of the vestibulocochlear nerve, and this information is taken to the auditory cortex and the temporal lobe of the brain, where it's interpreted as sound. The other function of the ear is equilibrium. This also involves sensory receptors in the inner ear, in the vestibule and in the semicircular canals. You actually have two kinds of equilibrium, static equilibrium and dynamic equilibrium. Static equilibrium is straight line movement. There are receptors in the vestibule that report what position your head is in. There are receptor cells that are embedded in the vestibule. These have a little membrane over them, and there are little rocks that roll around on this membrane. As your head moves, these rocks on the gel moves, and that bends the hairs. As a result of bending the hairs, the hair cells will send a signal on cranial nerve 8 to the cerebellum, and the cerebellum translates whether you're going forward or backward or left or right, only linear kinds of movements. The other kind of equilibrium is dynamic equilibrium. This is the equilibrium of rotation. This is a function of the semicircular canals. Again, these semicircular canals are all filled with fluid. So we have fluid in all of these canals. In one spot in the canal, we have these hair cells that again are covered with a little bit of gelatin. As fluid flows past this gelatin area, it's going to bend the gelatin, which will bend the hair cells. The hair cells will then send a signal, again along cranial nerve 8 to the cerebellum, which will be interpreted as you're turning right, you're turning left, you're going head over heels, whatever is going on. One of the problems that can occur with the ear is deafness. There are two kinds of deafness. We have conduction deafness, which is a mechanical condition. Something interferes with sound vibrations being transmitted all the way to the inner ear. This could be something as simple as earwax blocking the external auditory canal, something more dramatic like a ruptured eardrum, which won't vibrate, or otosclerosis. In otosclerosis, the ear ossicles are fused together and are one bone, rather than being three separate bones that can vibrate freely. Sensory neural deafness has something to do with the sensory organs. The nerve itself may be damaged. Certain drugs can do this. The receptors may degenerate, or the nerves or the auditory cortex in the brain can be damaged. Stroke, for example, could damage the auditory cortex in the brain. Loud sounds can lead to early degeneration of the receptors. A little bit of degeneration occurs with aging, but if you're continually exposed to loud sounds, you greatly accelerate that process. In otitis media, you have an inflammation of the middle ear. Here the eardrum is inflamed and fluid accumulates in the middle ear cavity. This can build up and can cause the eardrum to rupture. It also impairs hearing. The two chemical senses are taste and smell. They rely on chemoreceptors, which are receptors that respond to chemicals. The olfactory receptors, the ones for smell, are located in a patch in the upper nasal cavity. The taste buds, which are responsible for taste, are mostly on the tongue. Those olfactory receptors are neurons with little cilia on them. The cilia are bathed in mucus. As chemicals dissolve in the mucus, these neurons are stimulated. This means that that impulse goes to the olfactory nerve and is taken deeper into the brain where it's interpreted as various odors. Your sense of taste is on the tongue, and your tongue has rough spots called papilla. The taste buds are down in the channels around the papilla. The taste buds will have the gustatory cells, the receptors. These are the ones that are responsive to chemicals dissolved in the saliva. When these cells are stimulated, the neurons associated to them will send impulses to the gustatory cortex in the brain. It is estimated that we have the ability to pick up and detect about 10,000 different odors, but we can only detect 5 different tastes. As we look at the development of the senses, it will start with vision. Newborns see gray tones. Their lacrimal glands, their tear ducts, are not active during the first 2 weeks of life. However, by age 5, color vision and depth perception is well developed. As we age, we tend to develop something called presbyopia, old vision. The lens becomes less elastic and as a result does not bulge for us to see things close up. This is the farsightedness of the elderly. Also, as we age, the lacrimal glands become less active. Older people are plagued with dry eyes and as a result, more eye infections. The lens may become cloudy, cataracts developed. And the iris is less efficient and the pupils stay constricted more. It doesn't open up. This means that less light gets into the eye and this also hampers vision. In terms of hearing, in infants, hearing is fairly acute, but as we age, we get something called presbycusis, old hearing. This is the hearing loss that occurs with aging. Over time, just wear and tear on those receptors begin to take its toll. You can accelerate this by exposing yourself to loud noises. Taste is sharpest in the young and declines with age. As people get older, they may need to eat spicier foods, particularly more salt, in order to taste things.